is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you. So bad it's almost hard. Chalk it up to early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes. And you can be that guy, the one that I want, but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.
My name is Ryan Pack,
Hi, Nicole Barlow.
and this is Soundtrack Your Life, where we speak with the guests about a soundtrack that is important to them. Today, our guest is pop culture writer Russ Burlingame. He wrote the Josie book, which has been referenced in our Josie and the Pussycats episode with Laverne from Cinema Recall. And he's also working on some other stuff. Welcome, Russ.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, aside from the Josie book, what else are you working on these days?
Well, I'm doing a lot of freelance journalism work. I've been working for Oni Press, which they do comic books like Scott Pilgrim and Genderqueer. And I'm currently finishing up a book that is an oral history of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, which is kind of like the CW universe's version of Guardians of the Galaxy, but with time travel and a lot more gays.
Sounds great.
And then I'm working on the official companion to a movie called The Velocipaster 2, which is a sequel to a viral hit from 2019.
Very cool. And I guess that's a perfect tie into the fact that we were going to talk about the soundtrack to James Gunn's 2014 film, Guardians of the Galaxy 1. So, other than the obvious tie-in with The Legends of Tomorrow, why are we talking about Guardians of the Galaxy today?
Honestly, I didn't even think about Legends when I suggested Guardians as one of the kind of candidates. It's mostly just that I've been writing about comic books and related media in one form or another for over 25 years now. Like, I started writing for Wizard magazine as an intern when I was 19 years old. And so comics are kind of in my DNA as a writer, even when I write a book that's largely about commercialism and popular culture and music and all the things. It's still Josie and the Pussycats. It's still based on an Archie comic.
Right.
And so Guardians is not just kind of the big soundtrack in terms of like comic book movies. Because outside of Josie, I don't think there's ever been a comic book movie that had its soundtrack become such a core piece of its identity. But it's also this weird pop culture curiosity because I feel like it wouldn't be overstating it to suggest that Guardians kind of single-handedly brought back cassettes in retail record stores. After this movie came out, they made that novelty version of the Guardians mixtape. And then from zero, I mean, there's still a very small presence of cassettes, but every time I go to my local record store since 2014, there's a stand now, and it's like the 10 most popular things on tape. Which is, it's kind of wild to me thinking about the fact that like the state the Marvel Universe is in right now, 10 years ago, it was so beloved that it could like resurrect a dead format.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think you're being hyperbolic. I think this was in 2014 a legitimate phenomenon. The way that this movie is soundtracked and the way these 70s feel-good hits are needle dropped throughout the whole thing, really unique for its time. This is the second best selling soundtrack of all time behind Frozen, Disney's Frozen. So it's a big deal. It was and is a big deal, and I think a really big game changer. When you saw this movie in 2014, Russ, do you remember having recollections of it? Do you remember being affected by it in like a particular way? Like, wow, this hits.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I tend, as a pop culture writer, like Marvel was everywhere during that time. The thing that I thought was really interesting about this movie is that it didn't feel like every single other Marvel movie. And right around the time Guardians came out, somebody, I want to say it's Every Frame a Painting, but I'm probably wrong, but some YouTube account had done a video essay about how gray the score and the music of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was, and how completely lacking in identity it was.
It's still kind of true.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think Alan Silvestri's Avengers theme has gotten a cultural toehold, in part just because the movies themselves have become so enormous. But walking into this movie with the, then 6 or 7 years of Marvel movies that had never had a really notable record attached, it felt like it was this electric charge. And just the movie itself starts with that music montage where he's on the alien, on Morag. And even we go back before that, go to the trailer. Like the trailer for the movie, if you remember the first trailer that's completely set the tone for what to expect from Guardians of the Galaxy, it was Hooked on a Feeling. And it was very much a vibe trailer instead of a narrative trailer. Like you couldn't tell that much about the story based on what was going on there, but people went nuts for it.
Yeah.
I believe Hooked on a Feeling streams went up like 700% the next day.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it actually hit #1 on the iTunes charts, and that if I remember correctly, and I might be wrong, but I feel like it charted higher on iTunes than it had ever charted on Billboard during the time when it was actually a mainstream commercial hit on the radio, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, and I believe they included Spirit in the Sky on the soundtrack because the second trailer they released had Spirit in the Sky, and people loved it so much. They're like, well, I guess we got to stick it on the soundtrack because people want it.
Yeah, it's funny because there was also originally going to be an ELO song in this movie that got cut for time. And then famously, ELO was so annoyed by it that they almost didn't give them the song that opens the second movie. So
Interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, because Mr. Blue Sky opens the second movie, and to hear James Gunn tell it, nobody wanted the living thing scene to get cut from Guardians of the Galaxy 1, but it just ultimately became the best thing for the overall film and yada
yeah, I
yada.
think it was a pacing thing. He said that like it felt like it ground to a halt for one more music scene.
Right. Which, totally makes sense. I'm sure that was probably true. But James Gunn has also said, like, it was sad because ELO is kind of the ultimate Guardians band. And you can see that. I mean, they have this very, like, 70s, spacey, light. It's very much in the tonality of these films.
Yeah. This soundtrack also really works for me because I am like an incredibly basic person in terms of my music tastes. And like I'll try anything, and there are things that I like that are kind of off the beaten path, but I'll like just the way my brain works, I'll watch the same things or listen to the same records over and over and over and over again. I could not tell you how many times I've listened to the 2-disc Born to Be Wild, a retrospective by Steppenwolf, but it's in the many hundreds. I think I fell asleep listening to it every single day in high school. And so these kinds of like evergreen radio hits, the things that just never go away, they aren't necessarily my favorite, but they really kind of vibe with who I am, because it's like, oh yeah, it's not a thing that I'm ever going to turn off. It's not that I'm going to go searching for it, but this is a great record to like put on in the background of anything you're doing.
Yeah, and I think we kind of take for granted this needle drop approach now where nostalgia songs get used in this really ironic way and you're kind of supposed to laugh at them. But there's something nice about going back and revisiting the way they're used in Volume 1 and realizing there's actually a lot of like heart and sincerity to how they're used. They're actually nice juxtapositions and feel really intentional. Like these are good songs, right? Like they wouldn't be pop mega hits if they weren't enjoyable, familiar, good songs that create this great juxtaposition to the really strange landscapes that you find yourself in these films. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being basic, Russ. You're not basic. These are just good ass songs.
Yeah, and I believe James Gunn and supervisor Dave Jordan, who apparently soundtracks everything in the MCU, and then some, they went through like the top 300 songs of the 1970s, and that's kind of how they whittled down their list. And everything was kind of picked out except Moon Age Daydream. before post-production.
What's really funny about going through just the hits of the 70s is that one of my all-time favorite songs is the very last song in any Guardians movie, which is Badlands by Bruce Springsteen. And like, I'm such a huge Springsteen nerd. I literally today got a package in the mail with like 40 issues of Backstreet's magazine because I have to go back and archive them now that the website's down. But my best friend literally has a tattoo with Badlands lyrics on it. And we were in the theater like, oh, look at that. So I think just there's a vibe to the Guardians, and vibe is a really overused word now, but it's hard to get a better kind of sense for what it is that holds together these kind of disparate tracks on the 3 soundtracks.
Yeah, and going back to what you said earlier about the grayness of the MCU, I thought it was a smart choice at first that the MCU really didn't try to incorporate a lot of popular music into the movies to give it that dated sort of feel. But it's such maybe because it's 70s songs here, and you feel kind of out of time with being in space, it fits here, and it doesn't make you feel too much about like, oh yeah, this is 2014 specifically, or like
And
the
also,
other movie, like
sorry,
other superhero movies of the past, like especially Warner Brothers with oh, it's a Goo Goo Dolls song in Batman and Robin,
or put a ring on it at the end of Green Lantern for no reason.
right?
One thing too that's worth thinking about is the fact that like these are like, this is mostly diegetic music, right? This is his mom's mixtape, his mom who died in 1989 or whatever it was. And so the idea of a 30-ish-year-old woman in 1989, of course, she's going to like a bunch of songs from 1974. And even on the Volume 2 soundtrack, I can't remember the song, but there was one song that's, if you look, it's like, that's not a super famous song. What's with that? And it was like something that was a hit for like a local band in the St. Louis area, I think, where Gunn grew up. And so it's like, even that is like, oh yeah, that's like the stuff she listened to in high school. And so that kind of, not only like does the 70s pop have this very timeless feel, but also if you want a narrative reason for it, it's right there. Sorry.
That's okay.
Like in addition to being kind of timeless because of the fact that it's such an out of time thing, it's all diegetic music, right? So this is his mom's mixtape that they're actually playing in story. And so not only do you have kind of the timeless aspect of it, but also the fact that this is, dad rock or mom rock. And so there's a narrative reason why these are the songs. And the kind of ultimate example of that is in the Volume 2 soundtrack. I can't remember what song it is, but there's one song that was from like a local band in the St. Louis area. And so it's like the one that's weirdly less famous than all the rest, but it's something that Gunn would have listened to as a kid. And so it's something that Pete's mom would obviously have because narratively they come from the same place that Gunn does. Which again is a weird little piece of, I think, the puzzle of what makes the movie and the soundtrack so different to the rest of the MCU. Like Marvel, both in the comics and in the movies, famously takes place almost exclusively in Manhattan. And so having this be like a suburban mom from the Midwest, like fundamentally shifts the kind of stuff that is culturally important to her.
That's true. And that's a great point. I think it definitely factors into how the world was built and why James Gunn chose the songs that he chose. Specifically, I love the use of 10cc's I'm Not in Love, which is the song that he's listening to in the mixtape when the movie opens and he's in the hospital and his mom is dying. First of all, there's something very like weird and sad about such a popular radio-friendly song. It's one of those songs that just has like this air of melancholy to it. It's also used on the Virgin Suicides soundtrack. It's this kind of like softest of soft rock, but like texturally, it's also really adjacent to things that feel a little more modern and ambient, like Air or like Stereolab. Like it's just got a sound to it that I feel like both puts you in the headspace of why his mom would choose that. It's a radio friendly hit, but also has this very ethereal thing going on. So some really well chosen stuff that I think goes beyond basic radio hit.
Yeah, that song always kind of reminds me of something like Karma Police, where you're just like, every time you ever see that used in film or TV, it's always used in a kind of borderline ironic way.
For sure.
Yeah, so this is the first soundtrack with all previously released songs that ever reached number one. And then it went on to sell 3 million copies, which, these days is like unheard of.
Yeah, it's funny because when they were promoting the movie, because of my day job, I was working at comicbook.com at that time. And so I talked to Gunn and I talked to Tyler Bates, who did the score for the movie. In advance, they were like piping this music in over the sound system
Right.
while they were in production. And so Tyler is like working on the score as he's watching them in production. And there's like dailies with the Cherry Bomb scene where Cherry Bomb is being piped in overhead. And it's like, well, that makes it a lot easier to figure out how to segue in and out of a scene like that orchestrally, because you're like, this is exactly what what's going to be happening. And obviously that's unusual because most of the time you don't script the song into a movie because it's like, what if we can't afford it?
Right.
For sure. And yeah, I guess that's the benefit of being on the Marvel beat, is that the sky's kind of the limit. You have the world at your feet, music licensing wise. I don't know if James Gunn has ever said how many of these scenes that he crafted based on a song and how many were done the opposite way, but it does feel like a lot of them were sort of, picked, and then he thought like this would make a great moment in the movie.
I know at least by the third, he was confident enough in being able to get the songs that he was just writing it either into the screenplay itself or at least into the margins, so that people are like, this is what we're doing here. I don't recall whether that was always true. I think it might have been. But certainly by the time the franchise was over, it was just like, no, nobody's going to say no to, as you said, a franchise where the first record sold 3 million copies in 2014.
Right. Even ELO, they were like, we're going to get over it, probably.
Yeah.
I think this will be a good thing. Not that Mr. Blue Sky also hasn't been used for like a million different things. It's such a popular song to use on soundtracks and in trailers.
This is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you so bad it's almost hard. Chuck it into early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes, and you can be that guy, the one that I want but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.
But the soundtrack is like so beloved by Marvel itself. Like I have a Marvel Lego video game from my Switch, and the game opens to like a spaceship flying, and you hear, what's the song? You hear
Trying to think of which one it is that you're on the Morag
Come
one.
and Get Your Love.
Come and Get Your Love.
Yeah. Come and Get Your Love. So you hear that you see like the Lego logo, and then you see that, and then there's a DLC, an added like set of levels for the game, and one of them is literally the opening to Guardians of the Galaxy 2 with Mr. Blue Sky playing the entire time on loop while you're like trying to kill that big octopus.
Naturally.
It's funny that you mentioned the Lego thing, because one of the things I love about this movie, and this is such a small, silly thing, but I've always loved this, is when like the studio fanfare submits itself to the whims of the individual film. Like one of the stories I always tell about Josie and the Pussycats is that I remember sitting in the theater and just loving the fact that the MGM lion was like being played Backdoor Lover by Du Jour.
Yeah.
It's like, it's such a weird like cinematic shorthand way of saying like, we're going to be a little different. It's like we convinced them not to use the Marvel fanfare, and we're going to start with this, the song that's going to open the film. And so to me, like it's such a weird little thing, but it is another one of the many ways I think that this movie kind of signaled its intention right in the first like 5 minutes.
Yeah, I feel like it's the same with Scott Pilgrim versus the World. It's that 8-bit universal screen with the music, and immediately you kind of fall in love with like
Yeah.
the vibes of what the vibes of the movie are going to be.
Yeah.
Scott Pilgrim, by the way, is part of this little like mini thesis I have that ties into Josie and some other things, where it's like every 5 years for a long time, Universal made a movie that they could not figure out how to market or how to make it profitable. And then it came to home video and exploded and became a cult classic. Because it's like in 1990 you had Tremors, in 1995 you had Mallrats, in 2001 you had Josie, and then right around 2005-06, somewhere in there was Scott Pilgrim, and then the home video market collapsed and it didn't happen again. But for 20 years it was like, no, this is just a thing that Universal seems to do.
I remember watching that 3 times in the theaters.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always loved Edgar Wright, so it's one of those things that you make it a point to go out and see somebody like that. But
I think when it hit Netflix like 5 or 6 years ago, it was like in the top 10. It was like really, people were like, "Oh, Scott Pilgrim's here. We got to watch it."
Yeah, Scott Pilgrim, I think, also is one of those ones that, very much like Guardians, has this like feel good energy that people just like. Even if you've seen it 100 times, if it's on, you're not going to stop.
Right.
And which actually reminds me that one of the episodes I listened to before coming on here was your pop star episode.
Oh yeah, that was fun.
And you were talking a lot about Walk Hard.
Mm-hmm.
And Walk Hard is not only that kind of movie also, but on top of that, it's a movie that was directed by this guy, Jake Kasdan. And Jake directed my favorite movie of all time, this thing called Zero Effect, which also has a terrific soundtrack and which also is not streaming anywhere. And it's a pain in the butt to get. So I was like, oh, yeah, look, we got this little weird tie to Jake Kasdan, the fact that, because, again, that's a movie that, like, anytime it's on, I'll stop and just finish it.
Yeah, I know Jake. I know he's moved into TV a lot after Walk Hard. So he's done a lot of episodes of New Girl and I want to say The Office as well. Or maybe
I know he's got
misremembering that.
Jumanji 3 coming up. I feel like he's licking his wounds after Red 1. So, but yeah, it's funny because he, in addition to directing Zero Effect, because I sent you guys a handful of ideas for like, oh, I could do this or this or this.
Mhm.
And one of the things on that list was The Big Chill, which is like, I feel like the Guardians soundtrack is almost a spiritual successor to the Big Chill soundtrack because it's got so many of those 70s radio hits. And it's like,
right.
again, it was a huge selling soundtrack that was almost entirely stuff that like was already widely available. But that was Jake Kasdan's first movie in the absolute sense that he was the little kid next to Kevin Costner's coffin, because his dad directed that movie. Which is also why there's the Raiders of the Lost Ark parody in there, because Kasdan and Lucasfilm are old buddies.
Right. So speaking of best-selling soundtracks, I feel like because of this soundtrack, the kind of song track kind of came back into focus. Like I feel like for a while, there's a lot of scores. Maybe you get an end credit song, but I think this kind of gave a shot in the arm to movie studios to reinvest into like getting needle drops. And I don't think the Black Panther soundtrack goes as hard as it does if this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Like I think the story there was Ryan Coogler wanted Kendrick Lamar to do 2 songs for the movie, and Kendrick Lamar came back with like a whole album, and Marvel just said, "Sure, we'll pay you for it."
Yeah, which hard to blame them, especially that record was another one that did remarkably well. It's funny. I do think you mentioned Dave Jordan, who's the music supervisor on this and like all of the Marvel movies. I think that dude has really great judgment, not just in like when to say yes, when to not, but also you have this great combination of like Guardians was a huge hit with exclusively existing radio hits. Black Panther essentially was a concept album. And then even when you get to something much more basic and down to earth, like there's the Steppenwolf needle drop in Avengers Endgame. And I can't remember which one it is. It's like From Here to There Eventually or something. But it is not Born to Be Wild, Magic Carpet Ride, The Pusher, or Sookie Sookie. And so you're like, it's not the 4 Steppenwolf songs that anybody knows. It was like this weird, you're like in a $2 billion movie, there's this needle drop of a single that I'm the only person in the theater who knows what it is.
Yeah, and Ryan and I were talking about that a little bit, and I think that's where we're impressed is when a movie that has a big studio attached to it and is, found the infinite money glitch because it's Marvel, picks something that's a deeper cut or that's a more interesting choice for the film. And I think that's where the music supervision really comes into play, right? Is that instinct around what's going to work, because it's more risk to take something that people don't immediately know and aren't familiar with, that doesn't fit neatly into a trailer that everybody will get that, hit of recognition around.
Yeah.
So
Right,
that's definitely interesting.
Yeah, and in Spider-Man No Way Home, it starts with him with Spider-Man zipping around Manhattan with MJ to the Talking Heads' I Zimbra, which is not one of their most famous songs. It is famously a song that uses like gibberish as lyrics.
Yeah.
And they're zipping around to this Talking Head song, and like I'm the only person with his. Like, oh wow, they're using David Byrne. This is great. And then I think they ended that movie with 3 is the Magic Number by De La Soul. Because you have the 3 Spider-Men, which I think we can spoil at this point. Andrew Garfield is in the movie. But, I'm always impressed when they do cool things like that. The only time I feel like it was a little too on the nose in the MCU was the first Captain Marvel movie. Because they just wanted to beat you over the head with, like, we're in the 90s.
It's the 90s.
Yeah. It's funny because, like, the thing from that I remember and love is the Mallrats cameo.
Yeah, the best Stan Lee cameo in the MCU.
Yeah. And again, like, the great thing about that is not that just that Stan had his extended cameo in Mallrats, but also that, like, if you don't know what Mallrats is, like, you don't need to for that joke to land. He's just, reading a script or whatever. But, like, it also is kind of a deep cut. Like, it became a cult classic on home video, but that was also 30 years ago now. And now we're very old.
This is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you. So bad it's almost hard. Chalk it up to early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes, and you can be that guy, the one that I want, but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.
Right, and we're not in the peak Kevin Smith era where, people who aren't into his movies know who he is. Like, we're not to say he's past his prime, but,
No, I mean, actually, the 4:30 movie was his best reviewed film since Chasing Amy.
oh, yeah, I wanted to see that.
I see a Kevin Smith sort of resurgence coming along. I think they're going to re-release Dogma, and people are going to.
Yeah, he's doing.
Yeah, he finally got the rights back.
That, right? Yeah. So I feel like people are going to maybe see Kevin Smith's work anew. New generation.
He's another dude who has some pretty great soundtracks.
Yes.
I keep bugging a friend of mine who used to work at Mondo. I was like, you got to figure out a way to get the Chasing Amy soundtrack together, because that was a really cool soundtrack, but all of it was so expensive that Miramax was like, in no way are we going to put that out as a record.
Right. One of the true tragedies when something, you can't afford to release it as a soundtrack, or there's certain tracks that drop off because of licensing. Always a tragedy.
And Dave Pirner from Soul Asylum scored the movie.
Yeah. And there was a Tube of Wonderful by Dave Pirner was like the main like song that you think of when you think of Chasing Amy, unless you have a very specific mindset and the first thing you think of is Run's House. I could go off on a long tangent about Kevin. I'm a huge fan of his work, and over the years we become like texting buddies. So I like literally when I saw a 4:30 movie, the first thing I did at 2 a.m. was text him about it.
Yeah, I heard that when he saw the Stan Lee cameo in Captain Marvel that he cried in the theater.
Aw.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. And he had a really great story in my Josie and the Pussycats book, talking about how he and his wife went to see that movie at Universal City Walk and were the only ones in the theater opening weekend, and they were like, "This isn't good."
That's how I felt like during Popstar opening weekend.
Yeah.
It's like, where is everybody? This movie's great.
I've never actually, it's funny because I'm in Syracuse and we don't tend to sell out very much, but I've never been in a totally empty movie that turned out to be really good on opening weekend. I've never had that experience of dread of being like, oh no. The big one I remember going to and being the only person in the theater was Steel, the Shaquille O'Neal comic book adaptation.
Oh,
Oh,
God.
yeah.
I don't
forgot
know
about
what that is.
You don't know what that is for very good reason. It was not a good movie. The guy who directed it had done a bunch of episodes of The Incredible Hulk, and during the DVD bonus features and stuff would famously say, like, I kind of hate comics. I didn't want it to seem like a comic book. And it's like, but instead you got Judd Nelson as like a video game villain. Okay, that's better.
Oh, no. Now I'm kind of like, now I need to see it.
Warner Archive has it out on DVD for like $10, so you could find it that way if you wanted.
I totally forgot about that one. And we're not talking about real steel, right? We're talking about just
No,
steel.
Steel, which the character debuted in the Death of Superman story in the early 90s.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
One of the 4 guys who might or might not be Superman back from the dead. And one of my favorite stories, I went on another podcast that the premise of the show is take a terrible movie and fix it. Like, how would you have made this movie work? And like the day of, I was like, hey guys, do you think I could bring John Bogdanov on the show? John created Steel in the comic books. And so we did like a 3-hour episode where it was the hosts and me and the guy who co-created the character all just bagging on this movie for the longest time.
Oh, the early 90s with the whole, like, let's put Shaq in everything. Yeah, he had a game for the Sega Genesis.
Yeah. Not as good as the Charles Barkley Ninja game, but that's a whole other thing.
I think my old roommate went to, like, some record store and just went through the dollar bin and found some, like, mid-90s Shaq album that has, like,
Shaq
Jay-Z.
Fu. Yeah, I forgot about
that. Like, he's got some real ringers on that album.
He was just everywhere. Like, you forget a little bit, I think, because like Michael Jordan obviously never lost momentum. But like when Shaq first came on, before he was even in the pros, but certainly in the first year or two, was Blue Chips, the movie with him and Nick Nolte, where he played like a version of himself. And so it's like, it's impossible to really overstate how much of popular culture he permeated for those couple of years. It's really strange to think about because by the time he was out of the league, he'd kind of like gone out with a whimper. And
he started doing insurance commercials and stuff.
Yeah.
He's kind of the bridge between Jordan and like LeBron.
Yeah, no, for sure. He's in very much the same way because like when Shaq came up, there was the conversation of, is he going to catch up to, Kareem and Jordan? Is he going to be the next guy? And then I think right around the time that he started to fade, LeBron came up and it was just like, oh, well, we can just give all the attention to this dude.
Yeah, we'll put him in Space Jam too.
Yeah. Which, as far as I can tell, effectively convinced Warner Brothers that they don't actually want to own the Looney Tunes. Just crazy.
Yeah, that movie is a pile of garbage. That's all I got to say about that.
There's a really terrific video on the internet, and I can't remember exactly what it's called, but if you look on YouTube, there's a guy called Super Eye Patch Wolf, and he did a video about Space Jam 2. But it's not the actual Space Jam 2. It's like an imagined fever dream version of what Space Jam 2 would have been in like 1997. And describing the video cannot possibly sell it well enough because like it's a deeply silly concept, but it's so smart and so funny, and I highly recommend it. It is the only Space Jam spin-off media that I would ever tell somebody to intentionally go consume.
I haven't finished Space Jam 2. I think I'd rather watch that YouTube video than finish the movie.
It is like an hour and 20 minutes, so I think you get the same experience.
This is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you. So bad it's almost hard. Chalk it up to early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes, and you can be that guy, the one that I want, but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.
Back to the Guardians soundtrack. So I don't know if you've seen it, Russ, but James Gunn said that before they released the trailer that we talked about earlier with Hooked on a Feeling and, Chris Pratt giving the screen the finger and all that stuff, that he had made a completely different trailer that, like, didn't even really reference the movie. It was going to be kind of one of those kind of fake out things. And it tested better with audiences, but then Marvel was like, no, let's do like the more traditional trailer. I think people will like it. Have you seen this other trailer in question?
No, I haven't. That's interesting. It's funny because that sounds like what they wanted to do with Deadpool and Wolverine, where they apparently Reynolds genuinely pitched like pretending it was an original IP with him and Jackman. And then
Right.
just like when the movie started, suddenly Deadpool and Wolverine come out after the opening credits,
Right. You wanted to fake out the whole
which I
thing.
think would have been catastrophic in a lot of ways. But what's the trailer that Gunn cut for it?
It's not super clear, but it was kind of supposed to be one of those fake outs where you,
Okay.
I don't know
like
if it was,
Kind of like the South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut trailer, maybe, where they make you think it's like in a world and it's deeply serious and you see all the lasers and then it's just, oh no, it's cutting out Cartman.
yeah, something like that, something kind of more silly, like less about what the movie was going to be about. Like, you don't get the plot of the movie, but you definitely get like, oh, like these guys are rough around the edges and,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't think of I can't imagine that it would have performed better in the real world. Like maybe it tested better with people who were like expecting a superhero movie.
right.
But I remember that trailer even being its own kind of like mini phenomenon. I think it was the first Marvel trailer that broke a bunch of YouTube records in the first 48 hours and stuff.
Yeah, and I think now you could probably argue that there is a little bit of a Guardians of the Galaxy effect or formula. Even if you look at something like Peacemaker and that
yeah.
opening to Peacemaker that has that really great sort of hair metal song by that Norwegian glam metal band. Do
Yeah.
You Want to Taste It? Right? With the, silly dance and
Which again, James Gunn created that show. So like he's
exactly.
pulling this impact with him. What I'm really interested in is how the soundtrack and the score come together for Superman. Because
Damn, I was going to bring that up. What do we think is going to happen in Superman, Russ? Because again, we've all seen that trailer, I think, multiple times in different movies these past 2-3 months. What do you think he's going to do?
I wrote an article for Comic Book like 2 years ago because there had been some speculation that he would do a Superman movie for a while, and he turned one down. He did the Suicide Squad instead of doing a Man of Steel sequel. But a lot of people, when they heard he turned down Superman, were like, oh, thank God, I don't want Superman to be Guardians of the Galaxy. But I think that heart that you're talking about and the way that he earnestly connects with the music is going to be a lot more of what you see in Superman than the really bombastic humor. Like, he's a smart enough writer and a smart enough filmmaker that I don't think he's going to try to do James Gunn's Superman. I do think that there'll be DNA in here because I don't think that he's the kind of, I think he's an idiosyncratic voice. He's not going to be able to totally leave his influences behind. But like, I think anybody who is expecting it to be like deeply silly, like portions of the first Guardians, will probably be surprised and disappointed. I think it's going to be a lot more earnest in the way that the second and third movies were. And I kind of expect that he'll lean into scoring more and that the needle drops will be relatively few and far between. Although I do think he said that he had a couple of needle drops in the script.
That's my expectation also, but just as you said, right? Like his signatures are so strong that you're kind
Mhm.
of like, at least there's gonna be a couple moments where it's gonna be James Gunn and he probably can't help himself.
I mean, I see his discernment in the trailer where it's the John Williams score, but it's like an electric guitar
Yeah.
version where, instead of like, oh, here's some pop song from like 1975,
Mm.
it's a wink and a nod
Yeah.
to the past, but also something new. So I think at least he's trying to show that this is not going to be like the Guardians of the Galaxy version of Superman, even though, like you said, his voice is so strong. We'll probably see some sort of similarities, and there's going to be humor, of course, and I'm sure he'll have Jimmy Olsen or someone be some sort of comic relief that he can make jokes out of.
I will say that if I had to guess, just out of thin air, the big franchise soundtrack that I would use as a template for Superman, it I don't think that Gunn will choose Guardians. I think Gunn will go more with something like Creed. I don't know if you remember like the way that music worked in Creed, but like they used elements of all the Rocky themes throughout, but they infused it with like electric instruments and some production that you would find in East Coast rap and stuff. And the actual "Gotta Fly Now," like the actual fanfare part of the fanfare, the part everybody knows, the dun 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 dun, didn't actually happen until like the last round of the last fight in the movie. It was like they teased you that whole time and built to it to the point where by the time you got the Rocky theme, you were like, hell yeah, you know? And that's kind of what I expect Gunn to do more than the Guardians. I expect that if we get some version of the kind of like quote unquote real Williams theme, it'll be what Joss Whedon tried and kind of failed to do in Justice League, where Superman comes out at that key moment and lays into Steppenwolf, and they play the Williams theme. But I think Gunn has a much better sense of how to use music than Whedon does, and so he probably wouldn't drop that ball after 6 notes.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what happens with that. Obviously, you have your Snyder stands who are ready to hate it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and there's also I saw yesterday there's like a fake report going around that like, oh yeah, Warner Brothers is considering licensing out the Snyder universe for somebody to make on Netflix or something if Superman fails. And you're sitting here going, there's simply no way that's true. Everybody at Warner Brothers has already expressed regret over allowing the Snyder cut to happen. And like I genuinely love Man of Steel. I don't dislike any of Snyder's movies the way a lot of people do, and I thought that his cut was vastly superior to the Whedon cut. But I do think that people who are still expecting something like that to happen are deeply delusional and really should like watch a different movie sometime. Like just anything. Just watch
Any
a movie.
movie, any other movie, even The Watchmen, though, Russ. How do we feel about The Watchmen and the soundtracking in The Watchmen specifically?
I'm a little bit torn on it because like there are bits and pieces of this Watchmen soundtrack that I love. I thought that the Bob Dylan needle drop at the beginning was
The
beautiful.
best one.
Um,
It's great.
and My Chemical Romance doing Desolation Row at the end was a really great way to kind of bookend Dylan, because it's funny because Desolation Row was actually featured in the graphic novel. Like it was quoted as one of the chapter names. Whereas The Times They Are Changing was a Zack Snyder thing, and so I give him a lot of credit for finding a really great use of Dylan, and then using it to bookend the soundtrack. But then there was a lot of stuff in the soundtrack in between that's either super forgettable or like obviously Hallelujah became kind of a joke. And I think
Right.
that like people talk a lot about like irony poisoning and then how like one of the things that's really great about the original Superman movie is its earnestness. I genuinely think Zack Snyder is a pretty earnest guy. And
Yeah,
I
I do
think
too.
that I don't think he saw how ridiculous the Hallelujah scene would be read by people, because I think that to him, he's like, no, this is deeply affecting.
I agree with you, actually. I think he is a very earnest filmmaker. And then I think it comes down to a question of innate taste that
Yeah.
for me, his tastes do not align with anything that I would ever feel, because that is such a cheesy scene. And I think the way that people reacted to it is also super valid, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's very cheesy.
Well, and again, that scene didn't work for me at all, so I'm not even making any excuses by saying he's earnest. I'm just saying I think it's easy for people to kind of pick on that scene because it's to a lot of us, it's like self-evidently silly. But I just don't think Snyder as a person is programmed to see how silly it is. I think that he really thought like this is that moment.
Right. And
Correct.
it's an earnest song. So,
Mhm.
I'm sure if you're coming at it from that perspective, it works.
Mhm.
But definitely the best parts of that film for me and the soundtracking of that film are the opener, which is great, and then how it
Mm.
ends.
The only
Oh,
thing that
we're
bothered me about the opener, and this is the weirdest little thing, but because I was a huge Dylan fan when I was a kid, the montage is longer than the song, so they end up having to loop back to use
Oh,
more
really?
of the
To
time
the
that they were
beginning?
changing.
That's funny.
And so it's just one of those. I was like, it feels like there's a way around that. Use a live version or make a shorter montage. Like I don't know exactly how, because
Yeah,
obviously it's great, and unless you're a Dylan fan, you probably don't notice.
you
But
wouldn't know.
like, there's a point where you can, if you are paying attention, you can hear like the guitar loop back on itself during an instrumental, and I think it plays the last verse twice. I'm not positive.
That is such a great fun fact. Thank you for that. Now I'm gonna go watch it, and I'm gonna go
Yeah.
see where it starts to loop. That's amazing.
Yeah, not that we want to make this a big Zack Snyder
Oh no.
podcast, but yeah, I don't think his problem has ever been about earnestness or even vision.
Yeah.
It's
Uh,
been about execution.
Fun fact about the score to this movie again, Tyler Bates, who has scored almost all of James Gunn's movies, has also scored a bunch of stuff for
For
Snyder. I
Zack
believe he
Snyder.
scored Watchmen. And he definitely scored Dawn of the Dead, which was written by James Gunn and directed by Snyder. So those two are like kind of linked inextricably. And it's really interesting the way that either they are still friends or Snyder is just enough of a pro to not crap on Gunn, even though his fans do. But, like, you've seen the two of them, like, posing on social media together and hanging out and liking each other's posts and all that kinda stuff. As far as I can tell, they've been friends since 2009, and all of this animosity that's built up between the two camps of fandom is just, like, a reprise of, like, the '70s Marvel versus DC nonsense that none of the people
Right.
working at the companies believed in.
Sure. Yeah, no, it does seem like it exists in like the worst corners of the internet, but not in
Mhm.
Yeah.
real life. And
Well,
I think
Nicole
that,
was like, "Why is this a thing?" And I said, "Because on the internet, you can only like one thing.
yeah, you're only
Yeah.
allowed to have one opinion. You can't watch another movie.
You
Sure.
can't
So
like
that's
both
the
of them."
point. But I think this conversation really proves also that it is hard to soundtrack and score a comic book film
Yeah.
in a meaningful, unique, interesting way. So I think what Guardians achieved in 2014 was something really special and really revolutionary, both for its time and I think just, in general. I think it's a lot of swings. And it's easy to say, like, well, yeah, of course they could do that. Look at the budgets they had, look at the access that they had. But the choices still have to be there. You can end
Mhm.
up with a Watchmen or you can end up with a Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack.
I also think too that one of the things that makes the Guardians soundtrack work, and one of the things that makes the Guardians franchise music work kind of across the board, is how deeply rooted it is in character. Like,
Yes.
obviously, Brandy is the biggest example, the way they used it in the second film. But comic book movies, one of the reasons they're so fraught is because the stories are so big, everything's so epic, that when you do anything remotely earnest, you end up with the Hallelujah scene in Watchmen. Like, I
Yeah,
don't think that would be unique to Watchmen. I think you could probably dig up some other examples. Um,
absolutely.
and so part of the reason that Guardians works so well is because the films themselves and the soundtracks especially are very rooted in character. And I wrote the other day, it hasn't gone up yet. I wrote an article about kind of the problems that Marvel is facing post Endgame, and I compared it to the death of Superman in the '90s, and how when that happened, so many of the threads that they'd been building since the mid '80s all came to a head at the same time, and it felt like the end, and it felt like a good time to check out. And it's like the last movie that made $900 million for Marvel was Guardians 3. And it's not just
Mm.
about being tied to like the pre-Endgame Marvel. It's also the fact that they made you love these characters so much that you're not going to check out before it's done. And
Right.
I think that the soundtrack is part of that.
Totally. And I think, if you're looking for a counterweight to that owl ship scene with Hallelujah in
Hmm.
The Watchmen, right? You can probably look to Guardians and you can pinpoint when he's introducing Gamora to dance and to
Hmm.
music, and he's letting her listen to those headphones. And Sam Cooke's Bring It On Home to Me is playing over those headphones. And it's really soulful and it has a lot of heart and a lot of sweetness that you don't see in some of these more broad Marvel movies that
Hmm.
I have tended to kind of tune out in a lot of ways because the character development is not there. This first movie really gives you everyone's motivation, backstory, history in these really great moments. Every character gets fantastic moments in this
And you see
film. And
defense mechanism as well.
you do, and you understand who they are. You understand in that scene who Gamora is and
Hmm.
what she has been through. And that's rare for a film like this, and a deeper, I think, vision for how you build character and story than you sometimes see. So the music helps so much with that, and the choice of it helps so much with that. Choosing a soul song helps with that.
Hmm. I really think that one of the reasons it's important for Gunn to put music in the script and to know what you're shooting to is that if you don't have Sam Cooke in place by then, it takes you 80 songs to work through everything and figure out what works with the footage. And that's even assuming the footage comes out as well if you're not piping Sam Cooke in over the speakers. And so I think that like those two aspects are really intertwined. The reason that the music works so well is because it's already there and it's written around it. And so the reason the performances work so well with the music is because they're hearing it. And that's unusual in big tentpole movies generally. It's virtually unheard of in like the Marvel universe because as far as I know, there's really not very many needle drops outside of Guardians that were considered important enough to do that. And so I think that like it's all very wrapped up in itself.
Yeah. And he's done such a great job world building that they are able to exist outside of this Avengers storyline that they keep on trying to go back to. And I think that's their problem. I mean, I'm sure it's in your article, but they're trying to elevate people that were kind of on the periphery to being the main characters, and it's probably not working for a lot of people. Whereas Guardians, they were kind of their own thing, who just kind of pop. They kind of made a cameo in the
Yeah.
last two Avengers movies, and they're able to exist outside of it. And obviously the music is a big part of it. Like, hey, we get to listen to cool pop songs and not just another Avengers score.
I think it's really telling that when this movie came out, Guardians was seen as like this enormous gamble because it was so unlike anything
Yep.
else that Marvel had. But it still ends on a title card that says the Guardians of the Galaxy will return. I think that the way this franchise was built as a trilogy and the fact that Gunn had a really good idea of what he wanted to do with the characters in the long term really helped. I think being outside of kind of the mainstream Marvel universe allowed him to do that. But even when you look at things like Iron Man, where the third movie made more than Avengers did, that third movie was not guaranteed until they were ready to go into production. Like they were making deals on the fly. Most of these franchise, it wasn't like, hey, we're going to make 3 of these movies. And obviously Guardians had its own story. It almost didn't happen and all that kind of stuff. But like the fact that they had so much faith in this movie to put the Guardians are returning when everyone else in Hollywood was like, this movie could very well sink the studio. I think that speaks volumes, and I think that really explains a lot of why these movies work so much better than a lot of the other like series that Marvel has out.
Yeah. Didn't think about it like that, but I think you were right.
Yeah, those are great points.
This is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you. So bad it's almost hard. Chalk it up to early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes, and you can be that guy, the one that I want, but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.
Well, thank you, Russ, for being
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
our podcast.
I didn't even think about it till you mentioned Peacemaker. I should probably mention, I'm doing a little bit of writing for some documentary films, one of which is called Ulterior Motives. I don't know if you guys know anything about the song Ulterior Motives. 4 or 5 years ago, somebody posted a clip of a song on the internet and was like, hey, can you help me find this? And it became a really famous kind of lost media search for several years, and nobody could figure out where the heck this song came from. And almost exactly a year ago, last April, somebody finally found it. It was found in a 1980s porn. Um, and but the two guys who made the song they were musicians in the 80s, and then they became filmmakers in the 2000s, and they do like documentaries for Discovery Channel and stuff now. And so they're making a documentary about their own music career now. And they reached out to me because I'd interviewed them. They reached out to me and were like, hey, do you want to help with this thing? Do you want to write about like the lost media piece of it? Because the thing that makes their story accessible to a lot of people is the only part they weren't there for. And so I'm helping them kind of storyboard some scenes where we talk about the lost media piece, and I'm going to talk to some like YouTubers and stuff like that who had really brought a lot of attention to the song over the years. But it's a fascinating thing, and probably for a show about soundtracks, probably your audience would dig it when it comes out. I think the idea is to have it out in fairly early 2026. And the documentary also is just going to be called Ulterior Motives. The guys who are making it are Philip St. Booth and Christopher Booth. They're twin brothers whose band is called Who's Who.
That's awesome.
And like they have a weird story themselves that goes all the way, like their first band, they were in this Canadian band called Sweeney Todd. And at one point, the lead singer quit to go off on a solo music career. And so Chris stepped up and ended up being the singer of Sweeney Todd. The singer that quit, his name was Bryan Adams.
Wow.
Me, Brian Adams?
Yeah, the Bryan Adams was in a band with
Bryan
these two, not random guys, but these two guys who, like, most of the internet had no idea who they were until a year ago. And so it's a really fascinating story. I love the record, actually. They after the song went viral and they found out about it, they made an album of a bunch of their old 80s stuff that I thought was genuinely a really great record. And so I'm really excited to be working with them on that. And that seems like something that's really suited to the audience here.
That's
Oh,
awesome.
that's
Would love
great.
to know more about that. Keep us posted, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds super, super cool.
Yeah. So, Russ, if people want to follow you or find out what you're doing, how can they find you?
I'm on Blue Sky at Russ Burlingame, which is phonetically spelled. You guys can put it in the notes. I don't want to spell it out for you. But like at russburlingame.com, I'm on Blue Sky because I just use my domain. And then I'm on other social medias, but I don't generally engage very much with them. I just kind of post links. But you can follow me on, Substack and Patreon and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. I try to cross-post things everywhere. And I do freelance work for Screen Rant, and I do freelance work for, like I said, Oni Press. I did an interview in the back of a comic recently. So you can kind of find me everywhere, but if you go to one of my blogs, I make sure to cross-post everything. So it's like, hey, my Screen Rant story about this, or like I said, I wrote a story for Comic Book Club about the MCU that's relevant to this. And so if you go to Comic Book Club Live, you should be able to search that up.
Well, very cool. And we are also on Blue Sky. You can follow us on our domain name as well, soundtrackyourlife.net. Kind of on Instagram still at SoundtrackCast, and that other site as well. Well, thank you again, Russ. We
Thanks for having me
you.
and letting me just sit here and rant. I so rarely get to talk to people who are adults. I work from home, and so it's like I see my wife, and then pretty much everybody else is just children.
Well, I'm glad that we were able to be an outlet for you.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. Had a blast.
Thank you
All right.
so much, Russ.
Yeah,
It was
thank
really
you.
fun to talk to you. You have great stories and insight, and we hope you come back. And
Yeah, anytime.
We got to talk Ulterior Motives, and that's
Yeah, for sure.
release.
Yeah, for sure. I'll see if I can get Chris to come up.
Oh, awesome.
It'd be great.
This is Sadie Jean with her new single, The One That I Want But I Don't Know Why.
Thinking, oh my God, I'm breaking every rule that I live by for you. So bad it's almost hard. Chalk it up to early 20s torture. So put your lips on mine. It feels good when I close my eyes, and you can be that guy, the one that I want, but I don't know why.
That was Sadie Jean. Listen more on Spotify.